We are so excited to be your hosts tonight for Los Angeles for Abolition, dismantling jails and building liberation. This is a celebration of CRLA's amazing work to dismantle the carceral state. I'm Sarah Haley, and I teach in the Departments of Gender Studies and African American Studies at UCLA.
And I'm Jamani Montague, and I'm a CRLA member, and in a few weeks I'll be coming on as the National Membership Coordinator with Critical Resistance. So before we begin, I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge the fact that we're on stolen land right now, and that we're gathered here today on the occupied land of the Tonga people. So please join me in taking a moment of silence. Thank you. I would also like you all to join me in honoring YJC peace builder Carletta Jackson, who passed just recently last week. And I'm going to read something that the Youth Justice Coalition released to the community just days before Carletta's passing. So 1 second, please. While I pull that up. Carletta is our light, our encouragement, our tough love when we need it, our inspiration to move forward in life against all odds. She is our funny bone, our counselor, and the best friend anyone could ever have. She is loyal and loving, dedicated and 100% dependable. Corny as it sounds, she is really sugar and spice, naughty and nice, all at the same time. Like a rainbow that appears when rain and sun surprisingly collide at the same time. She is the rainbow that appears when she makes us laugh and cry all at once. She is our antidote for all that harms us. Carletta is our heartbeat. Let's take a moment of silence for Carletta. Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you, Jamani. It's been 15 years since the founding of Critical Resistance Los Angeles. We are honored and lucky to have Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, one of the CRLA original organizers, here with us tonight to celebrate this milestone and to help us consider what the road to abolition looks like and how we can best build toward the future we need. I still remember hearing Ruthie speak for the first time at the Critical Resistance East convening in 2001. At the time, I was doing some anti-prison activism in college in upstate New York, and I knew from the work of Eddie Ellis that imprisoned people in the state were disproportionately of color and from 7 neighborhoods in the city. And I, like many others, then assumed that prisons were being built to enrich upstate, predominantly white residents. I still recall Ruthie breaking it down, shattering our misguided notions, and explaining that prison expansion actually underdevelops the towns in which they are situated, economically destabilizing rather than enriching their residents. Now I teach Golden Gulag to undergrads at UCLA and witness their minds being similarly blown as Ruthie's genius deeply lifts their understanding of capitalism, the carceral state, and racism. This is just one small example of how CR and Ruthie have for years offered transformational visions and volumes of brilliant analysis that propel and prepare us to take action. For 15 years, CRLA has been shifting common sense toward abolition in the movement to fight the harms of imprisonment, policing, and the prison industrial complex writ large. For 15 years, CRLA has been slowly and steadily building with communities and organizations across Los Angeles to keep resistance to jail expansion alive.
So as many of you know, CRLA and Justice LA and our coalition partners helped to stop the construction of 2 jails in LA County this year. So following years of dedicated and creative organizing, first with LA No More Jails and then Justice LA, we stopped the construction of a new women's jail in February. And then just last month, we stopped the construction of a $2 billion mental health jail. Right? And that didn't happen overnight, right? So for 15 years now, CRLA and the orgs that make up Justice LA and LA No More Jails have been putting an enormous amount of pressure on the Board of Supervisors, on the Sheriff's Departments, and this year we won, y'all. So now our challenge is to make sure that the county puts that $2 billion plus into decentralized community-based systems of care, right? And not into jails or policing or the prison industrial complex. So on behalf of CR, I just wanted to extend a huge thank you to each and every one of you who contributed to the No Jails in LA campaign over the last 15 years. You know, whether you are a volunteer or a member, or organizer, a movement maybe, a coalition partner, all of y'all, thank y'all very much and give it up for yourselves. So we gotta keep fighting, and love, respect, solidarity, and peace, y'all.
The movement for abolition is growing, and CRLA is central to this national and international struggle. CRLA has demonstrated that collective organizing can stop prison and jail expansion. Abolition is a fight as well for gender justice, against intimate state violence, a struggle to end gender and sexual violence and end captivity as a response to such harms. Our next speaker is Kelley Savage, an organizer with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, or CCWP, and her sentence was commuted from LWOP. Alongside CRLA, CCWP has organized against the use of gender responsiveness or the building of kinder cages to justify prison expansion. CCWP and CRLA have fought against the disproportionate criminalization of women of color, queer and trans people, and survivors of violence. CCWP is at the forefront in the struggle for an anti-carceral feminist future, centering the leadership of people inside women's prisons. They've been holding a strategy session all weekend, and Kelley is here to tell us more.
Hello, everybody. So for people who don't know, there's 2 extreme sentences that equal death. Every sentence equals an emotional death inside incarceration, but for death penalty and life without the possibility of parole, you are condemned to die in prison unless someone steps up in your behalf. Whether it's a court case, right now, hopefully more options, or the governor's commutations, which have just taken place. Life without the possibility of parole, they tell you when you walk in, you are condemned or you're walking death row. You're just in general population with everyone else. So when we look at our movement and our processes, it's about looking at how we can change that, because the hardest struggle is having hope that it's worth fighting for ourselves when we're inside. And so when we look at what we're doing in our movement and in the conversations about ending jails, prisons, even the mental health state, we're in a situation where we're affecting change because we're giving them hope. The most important thing right now is that they all know that their voice matters inside, as well as the fact that you guys are all fighting for them from out here. Most don't even realize that there's someone out here having a convening tonight, today, last week, last month, whatever you were involved in. Most don't even realize that's happening unless people like you engage and have the conversation inside. and tell them. So it's about writing that letter. It's about sending in those articles. I've been getting the newsletter for a very long time, and I share it with each unit. And that was one of the things that they told me is, how can I get the newsletter because you're not here and I can't get it anymore. And so that mattered a lot. So when I found out that I could come here, that was one of the things I told them I was coming, and they said, tell them that we hear their voice for us. And that was a really important thing for me to relate to everybody today, because that wasn't just one unit, because we make sure that the newspaper travels everywhere. Working on the campaign, it isn't just, okay, there's a few people who meet the criteria for a commutation. We're working with them to prepare for board, whether they're an LWOP or not. We're working with them to have support for what their community is going to look like when they get out, because we don't realize that there's an opportunity, and then when there is, we're stuck in that middle ground. Where do we go? And so it's people like all of you that are actively engaging in what the movement looks like that's going to determine where they go in that future. Because we can't vote. You guys are voting for us. You guys are making the policies and having the conversations with the important people that are going to get that movement going and educate them on what the needs are. There's so many that are being released right now that they're blessed to have that opportunity, but they don't know where that future, what it looks like, or even that it's possible without your guys' voice. In the campaign, we have the opportunity with 100 different organizations to have the conversation this weekend, and it's a blessing that we have that, but we also know that all of you could be in the room as well and build up that movement. So I hope that you guys engage. All you have to do is go to the CCW site, and you can engage in either signing the governor's letter asking him to do more commutations, or just educate yourself. Maybe there's information that the person that you're working with on the inside might need information about. So I hope you guys choose to engage in that as well, and check out the website and see how you can offer your support.
Thank you, Kelley, and thank you, CCWP. I just have to take a minute to give a quick shout out to CCWP's commutation organizing, which was critical to the freedom of two people, most recently, Leonia Esteem and Doris Rodin, whose sentences were commuted on September 13th. To kick off our conversation tonight, I'm now really happy to introduce my friend and colleague, Robin D.G. Kelley. He is now glaring at me, but I'm gonna get through this intro anyway. He's Distinguished Professor and Gary B. Nash Endowed Chair in History at UCLA, where he is also a faculty member in the Department of African American Studies and the Global Jazz Program. He has received many honors, most recently a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association. The political impact of his work has been recognized with awards such as the Angela Davis Award from the American Studies Association, LA Cannes Freedom Now Award, and it's just not every day that you get to introduce the person who wrote the book on freedom dreams. In addition to Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination, he's written many other books on Black radical organizing that teach us about abolitionist practice, past and present, including Hammer and Hoe and Race Rebels. As a scholar of the surreal, his work on art as an intervention in life helps us apprehend the seemingly impossible world we desire. And he does this most recently in his biography of Thelonious Monk and in his book, Africa Speaks, America Answers. You can also read his critical essays in the Boston Review. I could go on and on about his public interventions, but I'm going to wrap up because, as you can see, he's getting anxious for me to stop this. So please welcome one of the most brilliant thinkers of our time and one of the kindest people I know.
That's funny, from my favorite colleague, and I can say that publicly. Okay, so thank you so much. Since time is short, I'm gonna get right into this. Before I introduce our speaker of the evening, our guest of honor, I also want to introduce two of the people who Ruthie will be in conversation with. One is Michael Saavedra. I'm sorry, I messed up. Saavedra, who's critical resistance LA staff organizer. Amazing person. So Michael came home from prison on February 22nd, 2017, after being inside for over 19 years, including time in solitary confinement for over 15 years. During that time, he helped organize, led, and participated in all 3 separate California prison hunger strikes against solitary confinement between 2011 and 2013. He also educated himself while in solitary confinement, was able to learn how to use the law successfully to sue the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation several times, as well as assist and teach others to do the same. Michael is now a pathway to law school student at Riverside City College and a UC Berkeley Underground Scholar Ambassador. Having started Riverside City College's first formerly imprisoned student organization, since his release, he's been working with many different social justice and anti-prison industrial complex organizations such as UCLA's Beyond the Bars, Prison Advocacy Network, Riverside, All of Us or None, Ovarian Psychos, California Families Against Solitary Confinement, and the Youth Justice Coalition in LA. So Political Resistance is really, really thrilled and happy to have Michael on staff. He's been there since March of this year, and his contribution to the campaign against jail expansion this year has been instrumental in the August victory against LA County's jail construction plans. So, Michael. Also in conversation with Ruthie is Azadeh Zohrabi. Azadeh is an activist. An activist and strategist with extensive experience in public policy, leadership development, community organizing, and management. As a daughter of 2 formerly incarcerated parents, Azadeh is deeply familiar with the intergenerational impacts of imprisonment. She has been active in prison reform efforts and advocacy for nearly 20 years. She previously worked at Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, leading the organization's fundraising and program management. And prior to that, she worked in leadership roles as a lawyer, advocate, researcher, and organizer on statewide and national campaigns, including the successful effort to end long-term solitary confinement in California. She is co-founder of the Ella Baker Workers Association and helped negotiate their first contract. And her work has been cited by courts, attorneys, scholars, featured in the New York Times, The Nation, The Guardian, Washington Post, many other publications, including Al Jazeera. And she earned her BA from UC Riverside. And amazing that, given that long bio, she was at UC Riverside as an undergraduate like in 2006. I'm like, how is that possible? Like, you had to be doing that stuff like 3 years old. In any case, she studied ethnic studies there and received a JD from UC Hastings College of Law. She's an active alumna of the Women's Policy Institute, Soros Justice Fellowship, and New Leaders Council, Oakland. So that's Azadeh. To the task at hand. So when Jess asked me to introduce Ruthie at tonight's event, I mean, remember when I got the email, I replied within seconds. I mean, it was less than 10 seconds. It was like an emphatic yes. And I thought, easy peasy. I've known Ruthie for over 30 years. We were colleagues once, comrades and friends forever. She's a mentor to me in so many ways, and a mentor to so many, including my daughter who's writing a dissertation that's really about geography, and my niece who's studying under Jenna Lloyd on the PhD program, all because of Ruthie. I've read just about everything she had written, as well as stuff that she'd written with her partner Craig, stuff that she published over the years, and it's a lot. In fact, it's so much that you need to look for 2 volumes of her writings that will be coming out, 1 volume with Verso, another with Haymarket. And as soon as it comes out, you need to run and get those books and read them. Even if you read those essays before, read them again. I've heard her speak too many times to remember, but each time was unforgettable. I've taught her magnificent, eye-popping book, Golden Gulag, many times, a work that everyone here, or anyone who calls themselves an abolitionist, is certainly familiar with. It is truly a book born of struggle. The idea germinated when Gilmore, the activist, was recruited by black women in Mother's Rock to help them challenge the deepening criminalization of their communities in the 1990s. Now, all the academic types know that she's a professor of geography at the Graduate Center at City University, New York, and directs the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics there. And everyone in this room knows that she co-founded Critical Resistance. I mean, you know, not to mention the California Prison Moratorium Project and the Central California Environmental Justice Network. So in short, Ruthie is my superhero. So I'm like, she's my superhero. So I'm thinking to myself, so how hard can this be? Just an introduction to my superhero. You know? But then last night, I'm flying back from Albuquerque and I'm on the plane, I'm having a panic attack. So I wasn't really working on this introduction. I'm like, oh, I could do that. And I thought, oh shit, she's my superhero. What does one say? Especially at an event for an organization she helped found, especially to folks who may know her superpowers better than me. So I decided to simply mention why her work in activism is so important to the work that you're doing, to the No More Jails campaign, right? You see, while she brilliantly explains why we have so many prisons and why they're so far away from the communities from which it extracts its caged population, she has always, always, always showed that the outcome was not inevitable, that the rise of the prison population, the prison nation, depended on the defeat of insurgent politics, an economic and ideological assault on labor, the criminalization and marginalization of black communities and immigrants, a concerted effort to suppress the prisoners' rights movement, and a war on the right of some people just to have rights. This is why she places struggle at the center of her work, always. Indeed, it is precisely the kinds of struggles documented in Golden Gulag and all of her other writings that explain how it is that so many people who had come to see prisons and jails as so good in the 1990s have come to see them so bad today. And that's why you're winning. Organizing, and also a change in attitude that has to do with organizing. That's the movement work. And as she predicted nearly 15 years ago, an alliance of workers, immigrants, anti-prison activists can not only organize to save public sector education, jobs, contracts, and pensions, but is uniquely situated to fight the growth of immigrant detention centers, the caging and separation of families, the criminalization of undocumented status, and the end of prisons and jails. In other words, it's like that joke about why the chicken crossed the road, you know, to basically prove to the possum that it can be done. Ruthie proves that it can be done, and it will be done. And that is the character of history, that history will change, and movements like these change it. And that is the lesson, I think, that Ruthie gives all of us. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore.
Wow, it is so nice to be here. Thank you, CR, for inviting me and for celebrating this great day with me. Thank you all who've done all the amazing work that has happened for us to come together and actually celebrate a day. Thank you, Watts Labor and Community Action Committee, for having built this amazing institution here in Watts for the people. It's really good to be here. It's good to be back here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
This is working? Okay, great. I wander a little bit, but I understand that this is what is projecting my voice. And the thing I'm wearing is just recording me for surveillance purposes. Okay. So, what is abolition? Here we are. We have won something. What we've won is on the road to abolition. What is it? Well, put in the most simple terms, abolition is a practical program of radical change cobbled together from the work that people do in disparate struggles every day. Every day. So what abolition is then is a vision, not a blueprint. We don't know how we're getting there, but we have a vision for what there is. And that means if it is a vision for life after prison, for life after borders, for life after capitalism, for life after racism, for life after sexism, for life after gender normativity, it is a vision then for what we must do during the struggle to realize it. During the struggle. In other words, what it is a vision in which we're always planning to win, even if we don't know what the fight is yet. That means we are thinking in the conceiving a struggle, conceiving a fight, figuring out who to hold hands with and who to shy away from. We are thinking about what is going to happen the morning after we win. And if what is likely to happen the morning after we win, that we're going to have to try to tear down what we won, then what we won is not abolition. That's what I mean by a vision. That's what I mean by a vision. And the vision has been realized tonight. Tonight we celebrate a win. We celebrate it. We celebrate it. It was hard fought. So I'm going to tell a few stories about some of the moments along the way that led to the possibility, that people here in this room and elsewhere fought so hard to realize in the defeat of the 2 jails this year in 2019. And I'm going to go back in time, but this is not going to be a professorial lecture, it's just stories. And we're going, the pictures disappeared. We're going to look at some pictures, but hang on and I'll tell you when to put the first one up. You went ahead of me. Not follow directions. What kind of Virgo are you? All right. So as probably everybody in this room knows, Critical Resistance was founded in 1997-98. And the way it was founded was by people who came together with a vision but not a blueprint. And what we thought was that we had to figure out a way to lay out an idea that we could not have described as briefly as I described abolition to you at the beginning of my remarks. We couldn't just say abolition is a practical program of change cobbled together by people in what they do in everyday disparate struggles. We couldn't have said that. We just said abolition is what we need to do. Unfinished liberation is what we are fighting for. And the prison industrial complex, which we thought of as a vast, vast thing that wasn't only about prisons and jails, but about everything that went into making those things appear in our landscapes as though they had always been there and should always be there. We thought, well, we'll have a conference, we'll invite people to come, there are people talking about this everywhere, and 500 people will show up, and we'll have a good discussion, and we'll figure out a campaign. So far, so good. In the summer of 1998, a few months before the first Critical Resistance Conference actually happened, it was in September of '98, a group of us went to Chicago to the inaugural Black Radical Congress that was held at the University of Illinois at Chicago. We got there and stood in the mezzanine in the Student Center and watched thousands of people pour into the building. People who had come to Chicago in carpools from Georgia and Louisiana and Texas and California. People who had saved all their money and bought extremely cheap airplane tickets. People had their pillows under their arms and sleeping bags on their shoulders. People crowded into that conference. And we who were at that conference, who were also part of the Critical Resistance Organizing Committee, realized at that moment that there was a hunger for this kind of discussion and debate and radical renewal, and that people were going to probably show up for our conference. We didn't require registration, we didn't charge any fees, and we had to go back to the Bay Area and prepare for a bigger crowd. And indeed, 3,500 people showed up for that first conference. At about the same time, in 1998, a group of people based in the Bay Area got together and said, we have got to stop the rapid proliferation of prisons in California. And inspired by Eddie Ellis, somebody who was a mentor of Sarah Haley's, who had been part of an organization in New York called the Prison Moratorium Project, we said, we will copy. Like, why invent a wheel when somebody already has made a wheel? We will copy this. And we had an idea that if we could figure out a way to run interference in prison expansion while organizing in other ways in communities and trying to seize the resources, especially the money resources, but also the people, imagination, and innovative resources that go into prison for other things, then we would successfully not only turn that tide, but bring back again a radical agenda for social life. That is what Critical Resistance is about. That is what California Prison Moratorium Project is about. Radical agenda for social life. Meanwhile, one of my favorite words, meanwhile, it's the name of the new chapter I'm adding to Golden Gulag. That's the title. Meanwhile, here in Southern California, not unusually, the ACLU, Southern California, had successfully sued the county over conditions of confinement in the jail. And so LA County was under what's called a consent decree, which was ordered the county to fix the murderous conditions in the county jail. Now, what many people in this room perhaps do not know is that almost every single prison or jail expansion program that I have learned about from the 70s, 80s, and early 90s that happened in the United States, almost every one that I've learned about so far, got kicked off because of a consent decree, i.e., people had organized inside and had fought to relieve themselves of the murderous conditions that prison and jail always is for anyone who's locked up. That is what it is. Prison and jail make people die faster than they would otherwise. That's what it is, period. And in fighting their way through, especially federal courts, which were more available then than they are now, they got federal judges to say, fix these fix these unconstitutional conditions in your prison or in your jail, right? So the jurisdiction would be put under an order, and then somebody would have to oversee the remaking of the lockup. Now, no court ever said, just knock the damn thing down and do something else with time and resources. They always said, fix it. So ACLU in Southern California was overseeing, from the point of view of the people who had sued on their own behalf, the people who were locked up, was overseeing the county fulfilling the terms of this decree. Well, lucky us, there was one lawyer. Is Melinda Bird here tonight? I wish you were. There was one lawyer who was in charge of their jail project here in Southern California who heard about abolition and wondered what was going on. And she invited me and some other people to come and talk to them about abolition. And she came to the realization, along with other people, that there is no such thing as a good jail. There is no better jail. And it wasn't something where she had the magical authority to sign a piece of paper and suddenly undo the consent decree, but it gave us the ground for struggle, at least in that area. And we continue to struggle in many, 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 many ways throughout Southern California. The last time the county was trying to build a new jail. So 15 years ago, almost to the minute, we met here in this hall. Almost to the minute. Now, why did we meet here? About a little under a year before, so in December of 2003, Critical Resistance and California Prison Moratorium Project, as well as people from California Coalition for Women Prisoners and other organizations, Ella Baker Center was there, others, came together to have a meeting to say, all right, if we want to stop some prisons and get some prisons closed, and that was Rose Brazz's audacious view of things, we should close prisons, not just stop them, the late, great Rose Brazz, then can we agree to an agenda for this, not a blueprint, but an agenda, so that we won't be fighting each other. We won't be disagreeing with each other when the opportunity to mount campaigns comes along. And that was the beginning of the blandly named Californians United for a Responsible Budget. Having started CURB, then we said, okay, how are we going to do this? A little bit later, in 2004, the then governor, I think it was still Schwarzenegger, was governor, established this blue ribbon commission to study the problem of California prisons. So we tried to get one member on this commission. And it seemed like, oh, we could probably get Dr. Gilmore, PhD, and teaches at Berkeley, or at the time, USC, I guess, and publications, blah, blah, blah. So we kept faxing my CV to them, and you could tell by the response that the fax was going straight to the shredder. We never got anybody who remotely would represent an abolitionist viewpoint on that commission. So what we did was we started our own commission. We established something we called the Shadow Commission. And we announced ourselves as such, the Shadow Commission, and we announced that we were holding hearings. And we invited community people to come to our hearings, which we held all over the state, and talk to us about what they wanted. What they wanted and why. So what we did here in October of 2004 was to hold a Shadow Commission hearing and talk about the LA County's proposed new jail and the measure that was on the ballot to be voted a couple of weeks later that would have funded it with regressive increase in sales tax, the Shadow Commission. So now you can put up the first slide, my friend. Can you see that? Kind of? All right. So when you came in tonight, you were invited to put money on the wall to indicate what you would put money resources into if you had control. Well, what we did 15 years ago was exactly that. We gave everybody the equivalent in post-it money of all the money that would have been raised had this tax increase gone through to build the new jail and hire more cops. So we did that, and people spent their money. This is how they spent it. They spent it on health, they spent it on education, they spent it on art. We had police and prison up there because we wanted to test the waters and see what people who came in this building, who were attracted by what we were talking about, but not necessarily in agreement with us, would say. There was a little bit, 3 or 4 stickies were on the police and 3 or 4 were on prisons and jails, and everything else was on all of the things that make life better and that help people live longer. That's what people spent their money on then, and that is what people appear to have spent their money on now. So in waging this battle here in Southern California, where we had also quickly established and got going a critical resistance chapter that was at the beginning, headed by an amazing organizer called Melissa Birch, who went on to do a lot of organizing with the New Way of Life, and then has since written an amazing study of what the impediments are to employment for formerly incarcerated people that will then help us figure out campaigns to open doors that need to be opened for all kinds of people. Then CRLA, in conjunction with Youth Justice Coalition, with other organizations here in town, with the Bus Riders Union, Patrice Cullors, who you know from Black Lives Matter, who was working with the BRU and also eventually founded Dignity and Power. All of these groups came together and fought against this Measure A. And much to our amazement, we won. We won in 2012. So who all were doing this work? Was it just little scraggly groups of activists? Yes, and other people. So here, for example, Bilal. You hear Bilal Ali? Here is Bilal Ali, who spoke on behalf of people who've been organizing for decades in South Central. Organizing once upon a time with the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense and with other organizations who spoke about the needs of people who had found that their ability to make living and support their households and communities had disappeared with deindustrialization. We organized with people who were the children of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. So you are all familiar with the great Susan Burton. Is Susan here tonight? No. But everybody knows Ms. Burton, right? Okay, Susan Burton. This is Susan's daughter, who also was organizing on behalf of the children of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, adult children as well as young children. We organized as well with people like this young man, who was a student at Cal State LA, who had grown up in East LA, and who had started an organization to work with especially young boys from East LA who seemed to be being pushed into a path that we now call today the school to prison pipeline, right? To work, do that kind of work. Now, all of these descriptions that I'm sharing with you tonight are not descriptions of wholly new or wholly innovative work. That if we go back in time, we can see that, for example, a guy called Huey Newton did a lot of organizing with at-risk kids in the late 1960s and into the early 1970s in Oakland, California, and elsewhere. So what I'm saying is, not only is abolition the work of bringing together the work that people are already doing, the practical work in their communities in disparate struggles, but it's also bringing work through time and understanding what kinds of powerful things people have done in other times and in other places, and how to connect or reconnect what has been torn apart with communities. We worked with public sector workers, organized public sector workers. We worked, obviously, as I've already mentioned, with formerly incarcerated people and their families and their communities, and other workers. Now, I have a rather stunning number to share with you, and at this moment I will sound very much like Professor Gilmore, which I also am. All right. If we count up in the United States of America today, how many people there are who are not documented to work, that is to say, because of their immigration status. They are not documented to work. So these are adults. And add to them all of the people who are documented not to work because of disqualifying arrest or conviction records, whether or not they were ever locked up. All right, so we're adding up those documented not to work, not documented to work. Put it together. 70 million people minimum. Minimum. That's half the labor force of the United States. Half of it. Now, my friend Rachel Kushner, who's here, wrote an article that featured me that was published in the New York Times Sunday magazine. And the New York Times Sunday magazine, which was highly skeptical of every goddamn thing we said in that article. Am I exaggerating?
You are not exaggerating.
Okay. It was everything. It was like every sentence, three things. Prove it, 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 prove it. So they got to the 70 million. They said, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. We're going to blow this one out of the water. Because this abolitionist, hothead, crazy-haired exaggerator made that up to get people's attention. So they called the US Department of Labor Statistics to find out what they had to say on this question. And the guy they talked to said, we think the number's low. We think Gilmore's number is very conservative, and the true number is probably closer to 100 million. That's what they said. I'm a really careful researcher. And it's not that I never make mistakes, everybody does. That's, you know, it's like sometimes you run a race and you lose, even if you've trained. But this one, I thought, I have got to err on the conservative side because nobody's going to believe that half of the US labor force is under threat of disemployment or unemployment at any given moment, and that this, comrades, pushes down wages for everybody. For everybody. All right. So we worked with people who fall into that category of other workers. And many of the workers of those 70 million are people who work in, of course, the most precarious and isolated kinds of work. So they're home health care workers, or work at the airport lifting suitcases if they can get a job, or they work doing gardening, or they work doing house framing. They do all kinds of things. Always being unsure whether they'll get the paycheck they were promised or the packet of cash, and whether there'll be another one afterward. Which means their entire households and communities, and you have to multiply that number 70 by something, at least 1.5, maybe 2, so that'd be 140 million, that their households and communities are also pulled down in this way. We also, next slide, did a lot of work, as Sarah Haley indicated in her pre-introduction of my introduction. A lot of work with rural communities in California, and we've extended this work throughout the United States and abroad. And the way that we found our way in to working with rural communities, was to ask, what are the life-threatening situations in rural communities that we can connect with the problem of prisons, mass incarceration, and criminalization? And one of the answers we got pretty quickly was environmental justice and environmental racism. So we worked with people organizing against environmental injustice in rural California. It took them 5 minutes to get what we were talking about when we talked about the problem of prisons as all-purpose solutions to social, economic, political problems. They got it. They got that a prison is a city, because it is, and that its environmental footprint couldn't be heavier, and that if you put people into the city, what comes out are broken people, dead people, and sewage. That's what prisons produce. Broken people and sewage. Unless people fight. So we also organized with people inside who refused to be broken, who endured the harm they faced at all times and became stronger and stronger and stronger through the opening of consciousness, as it's been described to me by people who were inside, through the opening of their consciousness and an understanding that the reformist reforms that seemed like the only thing that could be won were never going to end the life-ending conditions that prison presents to everybody. So, to come to the end of my remarks, I have about 2 more minutes. We worked as well, all through the state, with people in education, not only to interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline, but also to say, what kind of curriculum should students from little kids up be encountering so that they don't take for granted racism, capitalism, environmental injustice, gender normativity, all of those things, as well as criminalization. To denaturalize criminalization means we have to denaturalize all of those other kinds of relationships. And essentially, to get people to understand in their life's work that one cannot fix a thing with another thing. That a new jail doesn't fix an old jail, because the problem of the old jail is not the building, it's the human relations within it and that justifies it. So a brand new jail will not stop raping people in prison. A brand new jail will not stop the kind of life-shortening relations that characterize prisons and jails today. A brand new jail will not bring about mental health. It can't. It's still a jail. So to end, a prison is a prison. This is a poster that our friend, I think Royce and Filippo, made when we were fighting the female responsive community corrections centers that the Department of Corrections wanted to build. And they said, oh, these will be better because then women won't be separated from their children because the children can be in prison with their mothers, and this is going to solve the problem of destroyed households. Well, one, this doesn't helping anybody in a prison for women who didn't have children, right? There was this qualifying category. And 2, why on earth would putting children in cages, as we've learned at the border, solve anything? Solve anything. So, abolition is a vision, not a blueprint. We have to plan to win. That means plan for what we're going to do the next day if we win, the next fight that we have to conceive of, the next scale of activity. And we are taking this international. And finally, go way ahead till you get to a guy's face. All right. That's Michael Vinson, presenter. At the end of the day, abolition has got to be green. As Michael Vinson, Black Panther, longtime organizer, who ended his long career for social justice fighting against the use of pesticides in households because it was killing people, right? And fighting against the vermin in households left there by slumlords that were only being dealt with pesticides. So both of those things are killing people. And Michael Vinson not only had an amazing life here in Southern California, life of work, but his influence stretched abroad, and he became a very central person, for example, in El Salvador in Brazil, where people, I believe there's a center named for him, where people started to see a different way of thinking about the problems that they were struggling with in Brazil. So, abolition, and I'm claiming Michael Vinson as an abolitionist, has got to be green, but that means it also has to be red. And if it's going to be red, it's international by definition. Thank you. join me? Are we going to have chairs? Right on. Standing is hard.
Oh, I thought you were doing it.
I just want to say while we're setting up that the room tonight is a lot more full than it was in 2004, and that does my heart good. There's some study that somebody did, which was kind of not news for those of us who have passed a certain age, which is the older you get, the more light you need to see anything. Closer. The older you get, the more light you need to see anything. It's a take home. A take home. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do now is just have a conversation. I'll ask some questions of my comrades, then they'll ask me some questions. Now I can put my glasses on. And we'll see how it goes. So I first want to ask each of you, maybe start with Michael and then Azadeh, to talk about, how you got into the role you have now as an organizer. How did you get to where you're at in front of this room tonight?
So for me, it kind of started while I was in prison during the 2012 strikes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for me, it started around 2011, 2012 during the hunger strikes. Just watching folks, come together. And if I may, really quickly, on that note, I want to give a shout out and a huge thank you to peace builders out here in Watts and South Central who are helping build the bridge of unity between Black and Brown. Because for many years, there's been a lot of Black and Brown gang violence, and that's one of the things that we faced during the hunger strikes, and being able to come together and unite was ending the hostilities and violence that had occurred between Black and Brown prisoners. And so I think that was one of the greatest things that transpired out of the hunger strikes, was the ability for us to come together and end all our hostilities and have an agreement to work together. And so I think that's what's needed out here and what's happening right now. And I think that's super powerful for people of color to come together and stop killing each other and unite and become powerful, because together we are a very powerful voice. And so just watching that transpire, especially like when you're in solitary confinement or the SHU, it's very difficult to communicate with other prisoners, because as you know, that's the whole reason of isolation, right? So just watching how people came together and were able to communicate and send communications throughout the prison system, which ended up, I think at the first one, it was over 6,000 people who came together and in solidarity and supported us in the hunger strike. And those were even folks that weren't in solitary confinement. So for me, that was huge to watch how people organized. And in a situation where you're very oppressed and denied resources and communication?
I came into organizing in my late teens. I was thinking about what happened to my family. You heard in my intro, both my parents were political prisoners in Iran. And growing up, they wouldn't really talk about it. So in my teens, I started reading books written by US political prisoners in an effort to understand what happened to them. And I saw so many similarities between what was happening to political prisoners in Iran and what was happening in the United States with political prisoners that had fought in liberation movements. And through that, I became active in my first campaign, which was to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, who still had an active case in the late 90s when I started organizing. So at first, for me, organizing started on working around campaigns that I cared about, and most of it was centered around political prisoners. Later, when I was a student at Santa Monica Community College, and I began organizing with people on campus around different issues, more systemic issues, looking at the anti-war movement, looking at police brutality, but a lot of it was still in the communities and the neighborhoods I lived in with the people I went to school with. None of it was affiliated with any nonprofit, any paid position, and I really came to appreciate that later after I graduated law school and I actually did go to work in a lot of nonprofits and see how different it was and see how differently leadership was defined and how differently just movements came to be and how things were organized and who set the agenda. So I always kind of carried my original organizing experience with me, that people who are there experiencing the issues are the ones that kind of need to be in leadership, and if they're not, then we need to make space for them and bring them in. I ended up transferring out of community college to UC Riverside, and while I was there, I was in a relationship with this young man over here who was incarcerated, and I was studying ethnic studies, and I would send him things that were assigned to me to read in school. And one day I found out that they came and searched his cell, and they I sent him that was required for me to read in order to graduate to validate him as a member of the Black guerrilla family and put him in solitary confinement indefinitely. And I knew that didn't make sense to me. Like, how am I required to read this in one state institution in order to graduate? And how is he being tortured in another state institution for having the exact same materials? And then I really started thinking systemically about what needs to happen on a systemic level to prevent this from ever happening again. And I became really active in researching the case law and the politics around long-term solitary confinement, the SHU. When I was in my second year of law school in the Bay, you all went on hunger strike, and then I immediately got involved in the coalition in the Bay Area that was supporting the people who went on hunger strike in Pelican Bay and prisons all over the state, and then just continued that work and have been doing policy and advocacy more systemically since then. One of the things that I think it's important for us to talk about is how different the landscape is now from when it was 10, 20 years ago. Criminal justice reform is a very hot topic issue right now. It's a mainstream issue. And what I want to know from you, Ruthie, is how do these mainstream applications of criminal justice reform take away from abolition? What are we leaving behind when we are just focused on the reform and not the long-term vision of abolition? And what's the difference between reformist reforms and abolitionist reforms?
This is the question. The difference is this. I like Azadeh, that you framed your question as what do we leave behind? And what we can do is change one word and say, who do we leave behind? Because that's the difference. Reformist reform leaves behind millions and millions and millions and millions of people. It specifies that certain kinds of people in certain kinds of situations, like the mothers I talked about earlier, for the female responsive correctional CRCCs, FRICs we call them. If a reform is designed for people who are drug addicts, I'm all for people who are drug addicts getting help and not being criminalized. But if a reform is written so it says only people like this will get this benefit and nobody else will, which is how many reforms are written, allegedly to make them passable, then that is a reformist reform and it's not an abolitionist reform. So, to put it another way, abolition obviously is incremental. It's not an overnight project. It is a very, 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 very long-term work that we're making up as we go along, but we're making it up based on the actual conditions that people are fighting in, but aware also of who gets left behind if what we fight for is against them. If what we fight for is against them. And I just wanted to say one small thing, which is I used to be a legal something worker. I wasn't a lawyer, but I worked as a kind of legal assistant to a group of people who had founded an organization called California Prison Focus. And we used to go into the Bay and to the SHU in Corcoran and also at Valley State all the time to interview people who were locked up there about their conditions of confinement. Because we were a legal we weren't a firm, organization, we couldn't pick and choose. It was like anyone who signed up to talk to us, we had to talk to them. So we talked to all kinds of people, many of whom I would never have talked to otherwise. And the most stunning moment of all my time doing this at the Pelican Bay SHU was when I talked to one of the people who was part of the Aryan Brotherhood, a guy named Glass, I think was his last name. And they brought him out in the back to talk to us, and we were up in the front, this double glass and all kinds of stuff between us. And he looked through and he saw me, and he saw our supervising attorney, who also wears dreadlocks, a guy who teaches in the legal clinic at UC Davis. His name just slipped my mind. Millard Murphy. Anyway, so Mr. Aryan Brotherhood peeks through, sees my hair, sees Millard's hair, and you know what he thought? He thought the revolution had happened, and Angela and Mumia had come to free everyone.
What do you think about this question, Michael?
I think that right now, as we all know, prison reform is hot. You got people like Kim Kardashian talking about it. You got Trump talking about it. But where are they going with it? What is the work really doing? Is it just replacing already oppressive systems with more oppressive systems that don't look oppressive? Or are they abolishing the whole prison system? So I think that's important in the work that we're doing, that we do something that we're not going to have to end up dismantling later.
Yeah, with Underground Scholars is a program at UC Berkeley that supports currently and formerly incarcerated students with accessing higher education. Shout out to all my Underground Scholars in the building. We're expanding statewide to look for upcoming. We recently really wrestled with this question because we were part of a coalition in the Bay Area that's made up of all the different programs that serve formerly incarcerated students. And a lot of the funding coming down from these programs, coming down to these programs right now is being coming through probation. And so some of the people that applied for the funding from probation and work with probation invited probation to be a part of the coalition. And so when I came in, I talked to the students about this and why aren't people going to the coalition meetings anymore and what's going on, what's our relationship with them. And they were basically like, probation's at the table, so we're not going to be there anymore. I'm like, okay, that's cool, but let's take that conversation to the coalition and let them know why we're not going to be a part of their coalition anymore. And we were met with a lot of opposition at the beginning, and people really wanted probation at the table. And we really couldn't understand why. And instead of us making the case for why they should be there, we talked about it internally about what our principles are and what conditions we would work with them and what we wouldn't. And it was basically came down to accessing our people. If we need to deal with probation or CDCR to access our people, we will. But other than that, we're not going to be sitting in ongoing coalitions with them. We're not going to be part of a campaign with them. And a lot of the reason why is because, one, we don't believe we need them. We are doing the work ourselves. We've been doing it. We don't need them. Two, because the funding is coming through them and our funding comes from the state, At the end of the year, they're going to go back to the state and be like, with the funding you gave us, look at how many people we transitioned into college. Look at how many, and so you're constantly legitimizing that probation is needed at the table to facilitate what we're already doing without them. And so we took a very hard stance against that, and there was a lot of formerly incarcerated people who were at that coalition and at that table who disagreed with us at the beginning. But through several months of ongoing communication and just back and forth and political analysis, and some of those things were with probation at the table. At the meeting that we were voting on whether or not we were going to continue with probation at the table, they hired a formerly incarcerated person to represent probation. So they were trying to buy their seat at the table. They hired someone who had just come home from prison after doing 20-something years, and he came to the table on probation and formerly incarcerated. We said no. He came back next week and he said, I'm just going to be here representing myself, not as probation. And we said, that's very kind of you, but no. And we had to go around and take a vote, and all the people that were against us at the beginning voted with us at the end because they really saw the power in that. And I think part of it is through having those conversations, now we're not the only ones that are going to be at the state level telling our legislators, when you're putting this money down and you want it to go to programs that support formerly incarcerated people in higher education, we route it a different way because we're not taking that money if it comes from probation, and you're not achieving your goals that you say you're achieving if you're doing it that way. So you're delegitimizing their whole presence in that space by rejecting their presence in that space very clearly and on our terms and for our own reasons. So I think it's really important that this is part of the conversation. I'm so glad that you've been making it, like bringing it to the forefront for so long. And I'm just really grateful to be able to have like decades of, you know, activism and scholarship and work from you all to look to guide us in how we're trying to navigate this system, which is kind of the same but also very different now.
So I want to ask Azadeh and Ruthie how you look at your organizing principles, or what are the best principles when organizing for abolition in coalitions in large campaigns with various groups of people that have different styles, experiences, etc.
For me, my movement family is all of us or none. And I really believe in centering the voices, the experience, the solutions that are brought by people who have been closest to the problem and have lived through the problem. And as you can see in the story I just told, I don't feel like their positions are always aligned with abolition or always on point with abolition. But I feel like too often in these nonprofit, professionalized movement building spaces, we gloss over the struggle and the unity and the struggle it takes to reach a point of agreement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's necessary in the work that we're doing if we're serious about winning and if we're planning on winning. I think that's really necessary. So for me, the way I'm not formally incarcerated, and I'm running a program that's for formerly incarcerated people. So I made it clear when I got there, I'm only going to be there for a few years. I'm here to do some fundraising, build up the infrastructure, build up the leadership, and then you all are taking over. And I do my work in a way that's very intentional about centering their leadership, and I feel like that's a very important organizing principle. And then another really important organizing principle for me is just what you were saying, like we have to be ready to win. And in order to do that, all of our interactions and the way we move in our everyday life have to be tailored towards being prepared to win. And that means the way that we interact with each other, that means the way that we engage in movement spaces, that means how we show up for our families and in our relationships. All of that, I think, is tied to principles that I like to take with me into the movement.
I keep agreeing with you. Today is the first day we ever met. The three of us.
Thank you, Dylan, for assigning Ruthie's book to me when I was an undergrad at UC Riverside. Dr. Dylan Rodriguez.
Anyway, the principles, which is to say vision, principles is what is going to get us through, and it's the only thing that can get us through. Understanding that our practices always have to be determined by our principles, and that even means, especially, indeed, when we're working hand in hand with people who, as in the story that Azadeh just shared with us, people don't see the world, don't share the vision that we have yet. Don't share the vision that we have yet. I don't believe in this, let's go find unlikely allies and work with the not dead yet Koch brother and all those people. Not dead soon enough. Koch brother? No. But there are all these likely people we should be working with. We just haven't met them yet, necessarily. Or we know who they are in sort of categories, like there are all these people who have been locked up, there are all these people who have been criminalized, there are all these people who don't get paid for their jobs for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with criminalization, there are all these people whose lives are shortened because of the use of pesticides and diesel exhaust and all of that. There are all these people, kids who miss school because they have asthma, and kids in the United States die of asthma, like poor kids die of something that nobody should die from anymore. I mean, all of these things, give us some view into who we can work with, and the only way to do that work is to bring the principles with us so that the what does not get left behind again is a who does not get left behind. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't do a small project, as long as the small project has the open borders, and I'm using those words deliberately, the open borders that all projects have to have if they are truly revolutionary and intended to reform. I also wanted to say that, related to that there have to be ways that we work out in the context of building the relationships. Again, I'm going to talk about Azadeh's experience or Michael's experience with the hunger strike in the shoe, where people are responsible for what they have agreed to do. So there's that word accountability. I'm not crazy about it because it sounds like a balance sheet and it sounds like capitalism. But I appreciate its spirit. And the spirit is, if we're going to do something, then we have to do it. And one of the ways that we can make that, realize that necessity, is to ensure that people can fulfill the things that they say they're going to do, right? Can fulfill the promises. And that's another reason not to work with the not yet dead Koch brother, because there's no way anything that's liberatory for us will be fulfilled by $1 from him, and I will steal all his money. Right? I'm not saying don't steal their money, but don't do what they say. Right? Take the money and run. Take whatever money we get and run, so that the probation can't aggrandize, so that prison and jail can't aggrandize, so that different, the mission of education cannot be absorbed by prison and police, which is being absorbed by, that the mission of public health cannot be absorbed by prison and police, which is what it's being absorbed by, and the military. So that mission absorption, devouring, the means for us to make our lives cannot happen.
What are some of the organizing principles that you bring with you, Michael?
Well, first of all, I want to give a big shout out to JLA and my fam in the back, DPN, nieces. So I came kind of late in the game to the JLA fight, I believe around May. So, but I've been able to learn a lot of principles. I mean, being inside for so long and not really, as a youth, being involved in any type of organization besides what they want to call criminal organizations. It's different when you're working with a diverse population of people, and I think just learning from them, like the principles of accountability, transparency, holding your word true, like you say you're going to be there, people are counting on you, and I think that's very important, that you show up, and also making your voice be heard. Like for us, a lot of people that are formerly incarcerated, or I should just say for myself, I feel sometimes intimidated. We just had a meeting with some of the board of supervisors, and I feel really like, meek compared to them, and compared to a lot of the other organizers that we work with that are extremely intelligent and have a lot of experience. So I've been able to learn from them, and especially, again, something that prison has taught me is, being a man of your word, keeping your word to people. I think that's huge, and having a reputation in the work of being a man of your word or a woman of your word is tremendous, and it counts for a lot.
So given all this, I wonder why so many billions of dollars continue to be wasted on the carceral system. We saw the post-its that went up, oh, the screen is gone. The post-its that went up last time, Ruthie's first slide where people were voting with their money. We did that again today. Why are we still where we're at right now when we did it in 2004 to doing it now? Our priorities haven't really changed that much. We're still all about education, health, art, housing, healing. What is it going to take? Like, what's ahead? What is it going to take for us to really realize that abolitionist vision?
At this point, dramatically, that slide was going to show up and you'd say, ah, yes. We have been consistent over the last 15 years. It's really hard.
I applaud all of you for withstanding this heat and being here. Like, y'all are down, for real.
I know there's one person in this room who's like, it's not hot enough. I looked at it. But why does this money go where it goes? I mean, I think we know the answer to it, but it bears saying again. The spending priorities that are made with our money, which is what public money is, it's ours, is a matter of political will. And we change political will, as happened here in LA County now twice in the last 15 years, by organizing and organizing and organizing. And the hardest part I find for a lot of people to accept, like in the gut of their stomach, is that what we do is not an event. It's a way of life. It is really a way of life, and our lives change. I mean, when I first started organizing with Mother's Rock, I was a school dropout. I didn't have a day job. I was just cobbling things together. Now I'm like this big-time professor and all this stuff. You know, things change. Things change. But the work persists. And figuring out how to use our talents and resources to do the work is how we shift the determination to put the kind of money resources that go into prisons and jails and punishment into the things we want and need.
I would also like to say that even though this is a victory, the fight still isn't over. So now we're at the task of deciding or trying to push where the money will go, right? So like alternatives to incarceration, transformative justice, these are things that we want to see. Money being diverted back into the community care, community treatment instead of jail. So I think that's going to be a huge fight, right? But we're ready to take it on. And I think that we have learned from yourself and others who have organized. And I think one of the key points will probably be like being able to do what you spoke about in your book, like organizing unions, right? Unions are very powerful. And I think bringing them to the table and bringing more people to show up and have their voices heard is very powerful as well.
For me, the vision is also going to require us to continue being really, really bold in what we're visioning and what our demands are. I love what you said about like Rose being the one that said like not just stopping the construction but closing down the ones that are already there. Like how do we really think ahead? And I think the hunger strike was a good example of that too, because they were like, no, we're going to end indefinite solitary confinement, and we were like, are you a second hunger strike, a third hunger strike? Are we really going to do this? And we really came out with an outcome that was better than what we were even asking for in the lawsuit. But it was because we continued to be bold the whole entire time, even when this Department of Corrections said, we already did all the reforms we're going to do. We're like, no, that's not enough. And you guys were like, no, that's really not enough because you're going to have some bodies on your hand if you don't do the other reforms that we're asking for. So continuing to be bold, even though it looks like everything is against you and it's not going to happen, like doing what Ruthie said, like not making concessions that we're going to have to dismantle again later. I think that's going to be very key in abolition, especially as we continue winning things and as the shape of what we're trying to fight continues to change.
Where we at? We have a script. I mean, not a script. We have an agenda. I'd actually like to take a moment here to repeat and raise up Rose Brazz's name. For those of you who knew her, you know that Rose Braz was the organizer's organizer. She was a visionary. She was solid, she was defendable. All these good things that we talk about, like accountability, person of your word, she embodied that. And she was also an amazing funk aerobics dancer. Like, she completely embodied life in all these beautiful ways. And she was funny, and she liked to play games, all of this stuff. But she would sit and listen to people talk, and then say, I think we can do more than that. She would sit and listen or read something and say, we haven't thought about people who fight on behalf of biological diversity that is not about humans. Let's bring them into the story. She was a criminal defense lawyer. She hated being a lawyer, but she liked getting people off. Right? She hated lawyering, but she loved getting people off. And then she moved into working in critical resistance full-time, and then toward the end of her life, working for the Center for Biological Diversity full-time to work on the climate change campaign. Now, as we know, climate change is one of the sort of key central doctrines of the US military. When they're not compelling people to move because of their assaults on people in Iraq, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere, and all over the African continent and a good deal of Latin America as well. When they're not doing that, they're planning for the involuntary movement of people to escape the devastation wrought by climate change, rising sea level, desertification, so people can't grow their food. They're prepared for this, and they were the key producers of the carbon in the air from their amazing assortment of vehicles that produces climate change. So this is like the work we have to do, and that's why Rose took an abolitionist perspective to something that seemed, at first blush, not to be about humans. It was all about humans and the rest of life on this planet. So Rose Braz presenting.
So I've been enlightening myself and reading other books and stuff that has to do with mass incarceration and abolition. And I just want to read a quote from Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, which really resonates with me and kind of explains some of the rage I have inside. So here I go. Those of you who hope to be our allies in this fight should not be surprised if and when the day comes that when those who have been locked up and locked out finally have the chance to speak and truly be heard. What we hear is rage. The rage may frighten us. It may remind us of riots, uprisings, and buildings aflame. We may be tempted to control it or douse it with buckets of doubt, dismay, and disbelief. For we should do no such thing. Instead, when a young man who was born in the ghetto and who knows little of life beyond the walls of his prison cell and the invisible cage that has become his life, turns to us in bewilderment and rage, we should look him in the eye and tell him the truth, that you were set down in the ghetto in which, in fact, it intended that you should perish. The limits of your ambition were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity and in as many ways as possible that you were a worthless human being. You are not expected to aspire to excellence. you were expected to make peace with mediocrity. Damn. But mediocrity, right? Right. Little academic there, but you have, and many of us have defeated this intention, and we have, because we're here, we're free, and we're fighting. And for those brothers and sisters, power to them as well.
Thanks to the work of formerly incarcerated leaders who have really pushed that they need to be in these spaces, we've seen a lot more formerly incarcerated people in movement building spaces and in leadership, which I think is really important. But I still think it's not enough. Like, what do you think we need to do as a movement to make the movement more accessible and make participation more possible for formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated people?
I think it's very difficult because of the fact that, as you all heard of this term I just learned, but I think it's very relevant, the nonprofit industrial complex, right? And I'm not racist, but I've been a victim of racism all my life. But I think you have what they call white saviors, a lot of white saviors running a lot of nonprofit orgs that are really profiting and utilizing formerly incarcerated people's stories to get funding, to fatten their salaries, and to get fame and fortune, right? So I think it's time that we push back and push up against that and make sure our voices are heard and that we are on equal footing with leadership, salary, and privilege.
The last word. You know, I was thinking about the story you told Azadeh about the probation department, you know, hiring a person who had been locked up, who obviously had some idea that doing this thing that he was hired to do was going to be a good thing. I'm accepting that he didn't say, ha ha ha, you know, I will bring down undergrad scholars, or anything like that. So then this raises a question for us, and that is about the difference between representation inequality and revolutionary equality. Representational equality, and revolutionary equality. So if I'm hearing what you're saying, Michael, if I understand your message, the message isn't like leave all the not-for-profits the way they are, but have the leadership look different. But the not-for-profits or whatever institution will follow a different path if the leadership changes. Am I understanding you right? That what they'll do will be different?
I think it would be from a different perspective, right? Because those of us who lived in those cages, not just read about them or studied them, have a completely different perspective and impact. And I think it's an impact that stays with you for the rest of your life. And it's a passion that you'll never let down. And you're not doing it just for a paycheck. But don't get me wrong, like that brother who took that job, he probably needed that job because it is so hard to survive out here, especially if you have a criminal record. Nobody wants to hire you. Nobody wants to give you housing. So I don't knock that brother. But I think we need to educate our people into what this fight is really about and not be utilized or used or manipulated by those nonprofit industrial complex folks.
Could I share a little message from New York? New York City, No New Jails campaign, New York City sends greetings and deep comradely envy because we are here celebrating a win. And in New York, right now, there's a very elaborate plan to build 4 new jails. So it's allegedly closed Rikers campaign, but it's build 4 new jails. That's a whole new generation plus of people who get locked up. every imaginable reformist principle that you can imagine has been used to justify the new jails, right? So they said they'll be small. The other Rikers was big. So small means people will get services faster, so people won't die. That's it, people get services. The buildings will be more modern, so that somehow the terrible things that happen in the buildings on Rikers Island won't happen because the building is new. We're in a building that's not particularly new, and a really great thing is happening here tonight. So do we believe that buildings create destiny? I don't think so. Do you think a building raped anyone in prison? A building? No. Yet, the reforms being put forward by a panel of experts, public sector experts and their not-for-profit compradors in New York say women won't be raped anymore if there are new buildings. Men will not die anymore if there are new buildings. Men will not be lost in the system anymore if there are new buildings. Transgender people will no longer be at risk if there are new buildings. As though the problem is a relationship between a building, which is say a thing, and a thing, a new building, rather than the people and the people, right? This is like the basic confusion that capitalism drops in our heads, is to confuse relationships between people as relationships between things. And therefore then to make certain people into things. Right? All of these things happen. So no new jails in New York City sends warm greetings, is looking forward to learning from what happened here. It's a different kind of fight, but it's a fight where people are down to win. One of the things that the mayor's task force on the new jails has done is brought in a lot of formerly incarcerated people to repeat things that will never be fulfilled. I don't knock anybody for getting a paycheck either, but I do want to say that we face a problem if we imagine that somebody's demographic checking the box equals consciousness. Because it doesn't. Including mine, right? It doesn't equal consciousness. So that's the difficulty that people are struggling with now in New York, is that on both sides of the table, formerly incarcerated versus formerly incarcerated, there are no not-for-profits involved centrally, and that's the fight. So we have to be prepared also to educate and to take sides. That's the problem.
I think that's kind of relative to what we went through in prison. Like there was folks that were going home, folks that, were getting visits from their loved ones and couldn't really afford to get written up because that's what they did do to us. And we're doing it to ourselves. We thought of ways, we could have went like Attica, hold the cops hostage, demanded our demands, right? But we said we're gonna do this in a peaceful way because that's all they do is demonize and criminalize us for when we act out, right? They're gonna say, see, they're violent people. So we figured we'll do this in a, non-violent way. And how can they tell us that if we don't want to eat, that we have to eat? And how is that a crime, right? But yet we were written up. Folks were getting 115s for those, that's a disciplinary infraction, which they could take away time from you, good time that you've earned towards your sentence, privileges as well. And so there were a lot of folks, especially on the main lines, folks that were going home, that were like, I'm going home, right? I have a lot to lose. Most of those guys are stuck in there for life. But yet, they sacrificed themselves. They sacrificed their freedoms, their visits, their privileges to stand with us based on a principle, right? So I think that's the important thing. We can sell out, right? But at the end of the day, we're not supporting our fellow brothers and sisters, and that's what we need. Sometimes it's sacrifice. We put our bodies on the line. We almost died. My neighbor died. He sacrificed his life for the fight. many others have. And so I think that's what it's about, the sacrifice to make change.
I just want to lift up what we just heard, because what we just heard from Michael, and we also heard from Azadeh and the work that both of my comrades up here have been doing, is work that is not only doing outreach and organizing and development to end the prison industrial complex, but it's also changing consciousness. And that seems to be the thing. When you say, okay, I don't want to lose my chance to go home, but I'm going to take the 115 because of the importance of this struggle, that's consciousness. That is consciousness. That is how revolutions happen. Robin Kelley's written about it. I've tried to write about it. Other people are here who've written about it. We don't write about it to get academic jobs. We write about it to share the knowledge with people who are struggling, to see how people are struggling. We share tonight, not because we have all the answers, but we're trying to have the best possible questions to be able to move forward. And we share this space at the Watts Labor and Community Action Committee and this astonishing institution that makes possible coming together for all of us to have our consciousness shifted. Mine isn't done, right? It's always, always, always in progress, so that we can go out and fight better. So I want to thank you for welcoming me into this conversation and spending this evening with you.
Let's give it up for our panelists one more time. Michael Saavedra, Azadeh Zohrabi, and Ruthie Wilson Gilmore. So I just wanted to give a huge thanks to everyone who showed up tonight to support Critical Resistance, all of our coalition members, our coalition partners, our sponsors who are listed on the back of the program, our volunteers, just everyone who made this event possible. And then I just want to relay some last announcements. So we're going to be going all night tonight, ball until we fall. So mingle, enjoy desserts from Homegirl Cafe. There'll also be more tacos outside until 10 p.m. DJ Palm Era will be out until 10 as well. Ruthie will be at the back selling and signing books for folks who want to check those out. If you want merchandise, there are bags, totes, t-shirts, stickers also at the back. There's a lot of CR things at the back. Raffle prizes, so check your phone to see if you won. If you signed up for the raffle, stop by and pick up your prizes before you head out. And get to know each other, introduce yourself to folks, enjoy each other, and abolition in LA. Thank y'all.